Erev Shabbat Shalom, Parshat Pinchas. This week we're going to talk about fanatics. The Parsha actually continues at the very beginning what happened last week. Last week we read about how Balak, the king of Moab, hired Bilam, a famous prophet, to curse the Jews, to curse the Israelites, and every single time he tried to curse them, God turns the curse into a blessing. In order to get back at the Israelites, Bilam suggested apparently to Balak that the way to get them is through their libidos, and the way to get to the Israelites is through idolatry. And so apparently priestesses of Moab enticed large parts of the people into an orgiastic rite, which was a combination of idolatry and orgy, which is not an unusual combination in the ancient world. And there was a plague that God sent upon the people as punishment, and things really reached the nadir when the prince of Shimon took a princess of Moab and had his way with her in flagrante delicto, as they say, in front of the entire camp. At this point, Pinchas, who was the son of Elazar, in other words, Aaron's grandson, grabbed a spear and ran them both through, and that led to the end of the plague. The end, it sort of shook everybody up, and that was the end of that. The beginning of our parsha, God tells Moshe Rabbeinu that I am giving Pinchas a special place within the priesthood, Brit Kuhunat Olam, an eternal, a perpetual priesthood, because why? Says the Torah, because Bekanoet Kinoti Bitocham, because he was zealous for me, Velochilite Bnei Israel Bekinati, and as a result, because I was so zealous so upset about the way they were acting, he stopped me from wiping them out or wiping more of them out. There are a lot of things to say about this story. So first of all, the Torah makes a point of telling us that the prince who took this Moabite priestess or princess and had sex with her in the middle of the camp as part of this orgy for the gods of Moab, he was Zimri ben Salu. His name was Zimri, the son of Salu. He was the head of the prince of the tribe of Shimon, of Simon. Now that's really striking, because the last time we saw Shimon and Levi, Pinchas is from Levi, right? Pinchas and Shimon and Levi grouped together is in the book of Genesis. First, when Dinah was attacked and raped by Shechem, the Torah tells us that Shimon and Levi arranged for sort of set things up so that they could literally wipe out men of Shechem. They insisted that they become circumcised, and while they were recovering, Shimon and Levi took swords or spears and wiped out the men of Shechem. Jacob is absolutely horrified by what they did, by being so hot-headed, in sort of a Sonny Corleone kind of way. And he says, Shimon v'Levi achim, when it comes to the blessing on his deathbed, he says, Shimon v'Levi achim, Shimon and Levi are brothers, klei chamas michorotehem, they're into weapons of violence. And he says, Arura pamki az vevra tamki kashata, I curse their anger and their rage, and as a result, neither will get a place in Israel. They won't have a tribal inheritance. They'll be spread out throughout the people, and that's what happened. Shimon did not get a specific territory; get a certain number of cities that were his in the southern part of the country, and Levi, of course, had no territory either. They inhabited the number of cities that were uniquely for them, but they did not have any kind of territorial integrity. So that at that point, at the end of Genesis, the two of them are cahoots. And here you have Levi, or a descendant of Levi, going in and attacking, killing a descendant of Shimon. But the descendant of Shimon was a person who impulsively went and participated in or led the pagan orgy that went on in the camp, and Levi was zealous for God, and he actually puts an end to the orgy, puts an end to the pagan. I think what the word is. The pagan goings on, and gets rewarded. So it's really striking. So what do we make of this? So I would like to suggest that the contrast between the two here, between the Simonite, the Zimri, and Pinchas, is that both of them are still impulsive. Both of them are still hot-headed. Both of them are very, very intense. The difference is that Zimri, the representative of Simon, his impulsiveness, his rage, his anger, his hot-headedness were still not under control. He gave in to whatever his impulses were. Really, just like Sonny Corleone, which is in the first Godfather 1, and also later on in Godfather 3, for those of you who know the movie, the Vincent Mancini, who's the person who takes over for Michael Corleone. Throughout the whole movie, Michael Corleone keeps saying, just like his father, impulsive, too much anger, doesn't think, just follows his impulses. Pinchas, on the other hand, channeled his anger, channeled his rage. His personality didn't change, but he was able to control it and only let it come to expression under extreme circumstances. And apparently, God had to endorse or had to assure or legitimize that, because there were those who said, look, he's just like his ancestor Levi. He's going around shish kebabbing people. And but with God, by protecting and by rewarding Pinchas, seems to be saying there is a place. There is a place when we're in extreme circumstances, when the entire people, the future of the entire people is in danger for extremism, but has to stop. It has to have limits. It has to have channeled. It has to be channeled, and it has to be limited. And one has to recognize when not to endorse such activity. That's not an easy thing. Interestingly, the rabbis, at the same time as they recognized the importance or the legitimacy of what Pinchas did, they were somewhat conflicted or exhibited a certain amount of hesitancy about his actions as well. The rabbis equate, or they identify, Pinchas with Elijah. In the Midrash, Pinchas lives for hundreds of years, and he actually in his later life he's known as Elijah. Elijah was also a very extreme, demanding, unforgiving prophet. He's a person given to dramatic gestures and so on. I mean, after the episode on Carmel, which is we're going to read tomorrow, what ends up happening is that after the fire comes down and eats up the sacrifice that Elijah brings, and everybody sees that God is God and that the Baal is nothing, he says, "Go kill all the prophets of Baal." So it's a similar kind of personality. So even if Pinchas and Elijah weren't literally the same person, Elijah was certainly a sort of similar type of individual, and has a similar kind of personality and spiritual stance. Well, why do I say that the rabbis were a bit they were conflicted about him? It's interesting. At one stage in his life, Elijah goes to Sinai, and he ends up on Mount Horeb, where the Torah was given. And God says to Elijah, "Why are you here, Elijah? Why are you here, Eliyahu?" And Elijah said, "I'm sick to death from the Jews. Kano kineti l'shem tzvakot. I have been so jealous and so, consistent and so extreme in seeking to fight against the worshippers of Baal and for the greatness of God, against the actions of the Jewish people, ki britcha hifaru, because they have violated in the most blatant and the most unforgivable way the covenant that you made with them." Okay, and then the story goes on. It's not, and God reveals Himself to Eliyahu. It's not really important right at the moment. So he claims, he says to God, that the Israelites have violated the covenant. Okay, that's very nice. Now, let me ask you a question. Where does Eliyahu fit in our folklore? Where does he fit in our daily lives or in our lives? So number one, there are all kinds of stories about Eliyahu, and he appears in the Talmud, and after the Talmudic period, he's the person who finishes a minyan, produce there's 9 people, there's no 10th person, so somebody shows, a very mysterious guy shows up, and he makes the 10th. He's the 10th for a minyan. He allows them to do their mitzvahs. That's, by the way, there's a shul in Hebron called the Avraham Avinu. There's a shul in Yerushalayim called the Elijah shul, and that's the story. The story was they had 9 people and they needed a 10th, and Eliyahu showed up. But more people, in addition, we're very much aware of the fact that when does Elijah show up? We invoke Elijah at a bris, right? We sit in the bris that takes place in the seat of Elijah, and also he shows up at the Seder in the second half of the Seder. Why is that? It's very simple. A circumcision is the creation of the covenant between an individual little boy and God. The Seder on Pesach is the renewal of the covenant between all of Israel and God. Elijah comes to both not as a visit to be nice. He comes to both to testify to the fact that he was wrong. He comes to testify the fact that the Jews have not violated the covenant. On the contrary, he comes to testify to the fact that the Jews are continuing the covenant, whether it's the covenant of circumcision as a commitment of the individual Jew, or whether it's the national covenant of the birthday of the Jewish people on Pesach. He is there to testify that Britcha lo hefar. In other words, that his extremism, that his zealotry was not fully justified. He didn't give the Jews the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't willing to acknowledge their fundamental loyalty to their identity as individual Jews and as part of the Jewish people as a whole. And that's where the presence of Elijah comes from on those occasions. So in other words, what the rabbis are basically telling us here is that, with all due respect to the fact that under limited circumstances, intense, zealous, even fanatic behavior might be called for, it has to be regulated, it has to be channeled, it has to be controlled, because if it's not controlled, then you can end up being in the very, very unhappy situation that was described by Alexander Yanai, according to the rabbis, that one confuses the actions of Pinchas with those of Zimri. Food for thought. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week.